Harlem Hellfighters, an African-American regiment.
The Hellfighters, the infantry regiment of the New York Army National Guard, was the most celebrated African-American regiment in World War I. The regiment was nicknamed the Black Rattlers. The nickname Men of Bronze, French, Hommes de Bronze, was given to the regiment by the French, and Hellfighters, German, Hollingkampfer, by the Germans. Like their predecessors in the Civil War and successors in the wars that followed, these African-American troops fought a war for a country that refused them basic rights, and their bravery stood as a rebuke to racism. After years of lobbying by civic leaders from Harlem, Manhattan's celebrated black neighborhood, Governor Charles Whitman finally formed the all-black unit, first known as the 15th New York National Guard Regiment, in 1916, as the U.S. prepared for possible entry into World War I. Later the regiment was reformed and named the 369th Regiment. The majority of the enlistees actually came from Harlem, which was home to 50,000 of Manhattan's 60,000 African Americans in the 1910s. Others came from Brooklyn, towns up the Hudson River, and New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. When the U.S. entered World War I, many African Americans believed that entering the armed forces would help eliminate racial discrimination throughout the United States. Many felt it was a God-sent blessing so they could prove they deserved respect from their white compatriots through service in the armed forces. In October 1917, the regiment traveled to Camp Wadsworth in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where they received training in actual combat. Camp Wadsworth was set up similar to the French battlefields. While at Camp Wadsworth they experienced significant racism from the local communities and from other units. The 369th shipped out at the end of 1917 and joined its brigade upon arrival in France. The unit was relegated to labor service duties instead of combat training. The U.S. Army decided in April 1918 to assign the unit to the French Army for the duration of American participation in the war because many white American soldiers refused to perform combat duty with African Americans. The men were issued French weapons, helmets, belts, and pouches, although they continued to wear their U.S. uniforms. In France, the 369th was treated as if they were no different than any other French unit. For the most part, the French did not show hatred towards them and did not racially segregate the 369th. The Harlem Hellfighters quickly established a reputation for remarkable courage and effectiveness. While overseas, the Hellfighters saw enemy propaganda intended for them. It claimed Germans had done nothing wrong to blacks, and they should be fighting the USA, which had oppressed them for years. It had the opposite of the intended effect. During the war, the 369th Regimental Band, under the direction of James Reese Europe, became famous throughout Europe. It introduced the until then unknown music called jazz to British, French, and other European audiences. At the end of the war, the 369th returned to New York City, and on February 17, 1919, paraded through the city. This day became an unofficial holiday of sorts for all of Harlem. Many black school children were dismissed from school so that they could attend the parade.
If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel.